for Tim Beechie. Ready?
I'm ready. Not really.
With respect to floodplain channel management, in a setting downstream from reservoir where regulated flow results in conditions, both structurally and compositionally, out of sync with historic. Is it a hands-off situation or not?
From a thinning perspective, I presume.
I suspect.
Yeah. It depends on the magnitude of storage in the reservoir. So typically what we see, at least up in Washington, I'm thinking of examples up there. So downstream of a reservoir, there's a signal of lack of sediment, which means the channel will incise and the floodplain becomes much more stable. So the channel's not moving around like it normally would and eating into that riparian zone. So it starts to behave much more like a stable channel, and the wood recruitment then becomes a near stream wood recruitment problem. So in that case, you're really not thinking about protecting the whole floodplain. From a wood recruitment point of view, you can actually manage more of it and think about just the near-term recruitment as the recruitment zone, or the near-stream recruitment as the recruitment zone.
Okay. Did that satisfy the reservoir person? He started with "it depends." Just want to point that out. Question about tipping. I'm not sure who this would go to. Tipping adds to the cost of treatment. Does it limit the extent of treatment that can be done?
Yeah, that's
Who's
a
a
manager's
tipping-
question.
Who asked that question?
Is it a multi-part question?
It is.
Well, I just wanted to know, when I was on the OWEB board, we funded a lot of large wood projects. It costs a lot of money to put wooden streams. I know it's cheaper to do it when you're out there thinning, but is tipping a realistic strategy at the Northwest Forest Plan scale?
So the question is tipping a reasonable strategy at the Northwest Forest Plan scale?
Tom, you want to help?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's more of a management policy question. I mean, we can point out the benefits and presumably if we get an economist or somebody else, the costs of doing that. You know, with limited budgets, yeah, you can't do all of these intensive restoration activities, but agency has to decide how to prioritize things. So, you know, I don't, it's hard to say, but with limited budgets, it's hard to imagine it being a widespread activity, but if you are able to prioritize according to watershed scale patterns, then maybe it has a useful role somewhere.
So continuing on with his questions, does tipping without a near stream buffer affect bank stability and bank erosion? So if you're tipping trees, are you worried about erosion and bank stability?
You're taking them in the near stream, right next to the stream.
Basically tipping them right off the bank.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
tipping them off the bank?
Well, you would certainly reduce root strength, or you would at least move the bank back. So, yeah, you would.
That's a good one. I'm sorry. Speakers get Snyder after lunch, I think. And how does the variability of disturbance frequency affect wood delivery projections? It only takes multiple decades for delivery to occur. Oh, it may take multiple decades for delivery to occur.
When you're trying to think about modeling or projecting the benefits of the
Yeah.
how do you account for the delivery uncertainty?
Delivery uncertainty is the question.
Yeah, well, that's a huge question. The real simple little stand models that we showed didn't take into account natural events or other disturbances that would come on top of that. Obviously, that's another factor, and that's why, you know, we talked about stand level stuff. I think we're going to hear in the subsequent talks about whole watershed perspectives, which I think is where this whole discussion needs to go, because at that scale you can look at where you've got probabilities of different disturbances, and it's a watershed scale, and it certainly would affect you know, the wood in a system. You have to sort of account for some natural background, and predicting rare events like landslides and debris flows and wind throw is a scenario exercise. So you really have to say, well, if this happened, then this is what we get, or if that happened, this is what we get. So, but it clearly needs to be folded in, but we didn't do it in our simple exercises.
Okay, thank you. For Michael, see if you ate your Cheerios this morning. Your presentation showed no action in riparian produces more snags than any type of thinning. Practitioners are arguing that augmenting thinning with creation of snags and down wood to maximize the quality and duration of dead wood and riparian. Your presentation seemed to advocate that more dead wood is better for fish. Would you comment on the trade-offs and values gained or lost between not thinning, thinning only, thinning with augmented snag down wood creation, or simply killing trees?
What was the last one?
Or simply killing the trees?
Can I just pick one of those? Well, I guess first thing, actually the simulations that were run aren't, they're riparian in the sense that this is a riparian workshop, but really they're just simulations for a Doug fir dominated forest that if it happens to be near a stream, then it's a riparian forest, and if it's upland, it's an upland forest. There's a lot of questions in there. I guess the basic trade-offs that I covered in there, if you want wood, you have an option to thin or not thin, and there's going to be an effect on the various size classes of wood. So I guess it really comes down to what you actually want in terms of your structural characteristics. And generally, for the range of densities that we looked at, thinning tended to reduce the amount of large wood, and that's wood over a foot, probably below that, but we didn't look at anything smaller than that. Having said that, though, we didn't get into the landscape level analysis, as Tom just mentioned, but the idea with presenting that information was to show you a range of thinning options. And if you're looking at it at the landscape level, you can apply different treatments depending on what your initial stand size is and what you want in terms of your heterogeneity in the landscape, sort of this variable density thinning concept. And you can kind of pick and choose using a model, a calibrated model. You can pick and choose and say, given your initial stands conditions, here's the amount of wood you're going to get in this stand or the size that you're going to get over the long term. But that's not to say that everywhere you should have that, that same treatment. One of the points that we didn't include as a summary was don't do the same thing everywhere. Really, you really want to create heterogeneity. And so the idea really, the illustration was to show that different thinning regimes are going to give you different amounts of wood, and that variation in the abundance of dead wood, whether it's snags, down wood on the forest floor, or down wood in streams, that variation is really kind of an important structural component at a coarser scale than just the stand. And I couldn't tell you how many of those questions I answered with that, but hopefully I got one, okay?
I zoned out, I quit counting, I'm sorry.
Okay, good.
Whoever asked that question, did you feel satisfied? You're not going to admit it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Does that help it? I mean, if you,
Oh, it was you. All right.
It ties into what Gordy Reeves, I think, is going to talk about.
yeah, Gordy and me.
Variability
Time, yeah.
and the
Yeah.
need for, the need for variability.
Yeah.
I didn't see that, what you were doing in that presentation.
Well, yeah, you have to interpret the data, and you have to look at the initial stand condition, and then what type of thinning to apply. And if you have a range of stand conditions and a range of thinning treatments, if you run out all the simulations, you will get variability at some point in there or throughout the. Yeah.
That is NOAA Fisheries.
No, I just want. I actually have to clarify. We're scientists, so when somebody says on board, that doesn't really mean anything to me, because all I'm saying is, here's the data, and you can interpret it and do what you want with it, but the data speaks for itself. So NOAA doesn't need to.
Thank you, Dan. All right, another question. This is for Michael and Tom. Management riparian reserve seems to have been simplified into maximizing two criteria, shade and dead wood. Many stands that we are currently managing are plantations managed for maximum conifer wood production. Hardwoods and understory vegetation have been aggressively managed against. The ACS is an ecosystem-based approach. What restoration opportunities do you think are lost by focusing so aggressively on maximizing shade and dead wood And don't you think it is ironic that young plantations managed for maximum wood production are on an ideal ecological trajectory? I
Ironic?
think he's being funny with that second part.
Well, that's a good question. I think, the report that we wrote up covers a wide range of dimensions of ecosystems, including the hardwood component. And we didn't, in our 10 minutes each, we didn't have time to get into all the aspects of it. We focused primarily at the stand level, but it's clearly more than just dead wood and shade. There's all kinds of issues, and there are ways to, one of the big challenges that we had in our group discussions was the degree to which conifer plantations were the reference condition. And we had some really great discussions about that, because many of us feel that that isn't necessarily the benchmark, that it should be really some longer-term perspective in terms of later successional conditions, or a landscape perspective in terms of heterogeneity of conditions across the landscape. So, yeah, I mean, what you saw in our little presentation was a fairly narrow slice, and it is quite a bit wider than conifer, deadwood, and shade. And so, yeah, there's lots of things you could do to plant hardwoods or retain hardwoods, or open the canopy up to get more shrubs going in the understory. There's other dimensions of it. There's heterogeneity of the stand. The work that we've done in the Coast Range indicates, at least for the wilder parts of that landscape, those riparian environments were quite heterogeneous. There's lots of hardwoods, there's gaps. There's lots of places where there are no trees at all. And so taking that landscape view is the most challenging part. And in many respects, we were not asked to do that in our report that focused on thinning, but that is the big important part of it.
Yeah, I just want to add super quick that some of the modeling we did do that we didn't show you, you do, if you hit the trees pretty hard, and again, this is sort of along the lines of what Paul showed, if you want to get enough light to open up your understory, you can do pretty aggressive thinning, so there's a trade-off. You get the big trees faster if you do aggressive thinning. And potential, at least theoretically, you're going to, if they're more widely spaced, you're going to have longer limbs. Those are going to be bigger limbs, and so, at least conceptually speaking, you might end up with marbled murrelet habitat sooner. So those are the kind, and of course there's more, but I'm just trying to give some quick examples of some of the trade-offs, because that was the question. So we did not model all that. The only thing that we did model was the understory development, that is conifer regeneration. And at least in model world, again, the 60 TPA thin, that led to the greatest diversity of tree heights or tree diameters over the long run at about 200 years after the treatment, relative to the less aggressive thins or the no thin control. That's in the modeling world, and so there's a little grain of salt there with everything, but still it did show that those are some of the potential trade-offs associated with that you might not get as much of that if you don't thin. So, yeah.
For Michael and Tom again, the table you displayed for dead wood needs by species shows the average and range of diameter for dead trees. What about quantity? How much dead wood of a given size is adequate for habitat needs for different species? I think Michael showed that table. He was foraying out of his fish box.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. What we did was a semi-comprehensive literature search, but there's other people that really study this, in much more detail, and there's the whole Deadwood Advisor, or Decade Advisor, website and information, so you can get some sense of that. I don't know specific, and I don't know that there exists a lot of data on specific wood densities for specific species, that there's some requirement. There are some correlations out there, I know, with some of the cavity nesters and woodpeckers and things, but I don't know if you guys
The
wanna
database that Kim Mellon has pulled together, Decade, has the best state of the science on quantities, qualities, species, all of that stuff, so.
Yeah, we plundered that. I think there's also been some work in terms of wood in streams where there's people who've gone to reference conditions and looked at mature forests or old growth forests. People have tried to get a handle on what is a natural abundance of streams and wood in streams, and generally speaking, most wood in streams is far below its historic levels, not entirely, and there's variation out there, but there is a fair amount out there on that level in terms of just people going and establishing reference conditions. And that gives, but again, the question of how much of that wood is essential for fish, we don't have a good handle on it. We just know that what the reference conditions look like. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or no? You're good. You're good. Okay.
Tim,
Oh.
given that several studies indicate that the fire return interval along streams is not significantly different from the adjacent upland, how do you come up with the long fire return intervals shown on your slide? Seems you are speaking only to wetter forest types.
Should I follow the question?
Can you read the first part of that again? Was it the, yeah. Indicate that fire intervals along streams are not significantly different, right? Yeah, I was not able to find anything in the literature that said it was significantly different along streams. Is that the same? I don't know who I'm talking to. Is there? There, yeah. So is that? Am I interpreting that? Is that you're?
I've seen several studies that show that the fire return interval in their riparian area is not really different from the adjacent.
Right, yeah, that's what I found too. And so what I was looking at was fire return intervals calculated based on age structure from fire maps in the North Cascades. And so the range that I was looking at was the Douglas fir hemlock zone, which tended to be in the high 100s to maybe 250-year return interval, and then the silver fir zone had a much longer return interval. Are you thinking about the east side forests as well? Is that?
I'm also thinking about the further south you go along the Cascades.
Oh, right, yeah, I did not look at fire return intervals in Oregon, so
Those curves might shift.
they might, yeah. And in the interior, they're definitely very different. If you're in pine forest, the stand replacing fire return intervals tend to be very long, but the fire frequency, the ground fires, is very short. But they tend to be grass fires and don't burn the canopy most of the time. And I was looking specifically at stand replacing fire return intervals, so the ones that actually kill a big chunk of the forest. But I did not look them up for Oregon, but I think that's been done. I think people have those numbers.
Okay, question for Sam from the web chat group. Hi, guys. Do we know that tipping is 100% effective at delivering wood to the channel? 60% might be good on some sites. Would it change your projections?
Well, in the simulation that I did, it's modeled such that the probability of that tree that you're tipping, it's 100% likely to go into the stream. Now, if you're asking me on the ground what's going to happen, I don't know. I mean,
But it sounds like you wouldn't model it at a 60% chance for any reason because you've got some assurity that it's going to hit the stream with your
yeah,
best
I
efforts.
imagine if somebody's tipping it deliberately into the stream, that's going to make that probability about as high as you can get.
Yeah, has anybody here
that's sort of
tipped
the
a tree
objective.
and missed?
Yeah.
Curious. Probably would admit it. Stan. Yes, Stan.
I passed you that question
Oh.
from the web,
Uh-huh.
from the web chat, and the point was that topographically, there are things in the stand that would result in it not necessarily hitting the channel. It could be rocks, it could be trees getting in the way, there are a variety of operational things. From site to site, it will vary, and so to make the projections based on 100% might lead to overestimates that we're going through.
Yeah, and I think you're right, but one of the things to remember is that we calculate that on a meter by meter back from the stream. And I think if you were on the ground and doing that, wouldn't you look at your tree, and if there was a big rock between it and the stream, 2 meters, you probably wouldn't choose that tree. I mean, I'm sort of back to, there's the complexity of what we can model, and I have not modeled that complexity in there. I don't account for rocks. I simply don't know. We don't have the data to put in there. We don't have that information. And you're totally right that, there may be things out there, there may be trees in the way. But I think that because we're trying to model it as you might approach it on the ground, that you were going to tip in the trees closest to the stream, and you'd certainly look for the ones that were easiest to get in there. And the whole falling and having other trees obstruct that is something that we've talked about. And again, we don't have the data, we don't have the model to include into that. It'd be great if we did, but yeah, you're right. There's some realistic issues that it's a model, it's an abstraction.
I'm just channeling the web, so.
Stan, hey, Stan, I did want to say, if we got Beaver to do the job They have about a 90% effectiveness on that. They do sometimes. Yeah, there you go.
For those of you out there in TV land that missed that, it was a football slam of some kind. All right, moving on. Beavers are 90-some%. Yeah, that's really good.
Very helpful.
Okay,
They're
Spies
very
Pollock. Is the science team, converging on a model and set of assumptions for particular stand types? And if I can double dip you here, it looks like the NetMap modeling largely supports the conclusions presented by Michael. Is that an accurate characterization? What is the reaction from Michael?
Well, to
Tom,
answer
why don't you do the first one?
just the
Tom
first part, are
first,
we
yeah.
converging on a what?
Are you converging on a model and a set of assumptions for particular stand types?
No, because we're done. We're not doing anything anymore. But at the time, we talked about having models that might be used or modeling different initial conditions. We talked about that as a possibility, that you almost would have a decision tree. It would say, if you're in this condition, then this is a pathway that you might expect, or if you're in that condition, another pathway. But we never got to that point, and it would take a lot to pull the team together to do that again.
It would.
It would.
I'll just give a sort of quick rundown. I mean, we did talk a lot about the three different main models, Organon, Zelig, and FVS. And I think, I don't know, I'll just say what I think is. Organon kind of seemed like the low qual model because you couldn't really tweak the parameters that well. FVS, if you carefully parameterized it, you could get results that were I guess, believable, as we saw. And then, Tom, maybe you could talk about Zelig, because it seemed like that was actually validated, but it's a little more challenging to use than FVS. So.
If the question is what stand models are we converged on, the sort of a catch-22. Zelig, we've been working with. It's a research model. It's an ecological gap model. We published calibration papers to look at how well it performs against real data, and we feel pretty good about using it. But it's not a user-friendly model. So to have it unleashed on a bunch of folks would not be probably a prudent thing, because we don't have the support staff to offer user support. FVS is out there. It's certainly well supported on the Forest Service side, and there may be ways to adjust it to make it better able to focus or predict dead wood. I think a lot of these models were never really designed to produce dead wood, so I think there might be some interesting opportunities for some folks to sort of play around with some of these models vis-a-vis dead wood calibration.
One more question, I'm kind of
Then the answer about Sam,
Okay.
that was yes.
Yes.
Okay, that it does. And I just add super quick that, a lot of this tree tipping, I always think of cow tipping for some reason.
Tractor tipping.
From a management perspective or a fish habitat recovery perspective, there's something a little, I don't know, silly for lack of a better way to put it, to say we're going to grow trees, to recover fish habitat, we're going to grow trees, we're going to wait a century for them to start getting big enough to fall into the stream in a random direction. And that's our approach. Versus, okay, we've got a problem. We've got really some degraded habitat in a lot of these streams that have been cleaned or otherwise the wood's washed out. You go in, you tip them in, or you manually put them in. I mean, if we really are in a sort of crisis situation here where we've got declining stream habitat, it just seems very intuitive to me that the best way to immediately recover that habitat is to just pull trees out of the forest and put them in, whether riparian or otherwise. So, I was really appreciative of just showing even just a simple sort of, well, not simple, I don't mean in that sense, but a relatively low-key effort in the sense of tree tipping, you can get more than you would just by waiting over time. So, I'm an advocate for getting as much wood as we can sooner. And if you actually put it in too, you got to realize you can put the wood in and have it function the way you want it to function, versus if your trees are just randomly falling in, a lot of them might hit the stream, but they don't actually do an awful lot. So from a pure, don't care about the rest of the ecosystem, just trying to get the stream habitat in shape, which is important and it's really degraded, that's something that I think we all should be thinking about really hard.
The other questions I think we've touched on, but we're going to have to move on. So if you, I'm holding one of your slips, find one of these guys in the break. And Kate Meyer, are you here somewhere? Kate?
Yes.
There she is. Someone had a question about how you even do tree tipping. So whoever had that question, Kate. Kate knows, and she's never missed.
good.
So find Kate.
Come on,
All right, thank you guys very much.